Well, Krishna was advisor to the Pandavas, but he was also the ruler of the kingdom of Dwarka, a kingdom consisting of a large island joined to the mainland by a bridge of blue and green stone. And Krishna had a son named Samba. And though Krishna was filled with wisdom and right action, his son was not. He was known for chaos, for causing ruckuses and drinking late into the night and singing songs at odd hours, and generally running around the kingdom and causing trouble. Well, one day, 3 Brahmins came to visit Dwarka. These Brahmins came every year, and they were known for their wisdom. When they came to Dwarka, the people would go to the Brahmins and ask them questions, and the Brahmins would teach. And they would teach about the previous world and the world to come. They would teach about the flower and the seed. They would teach about right action and how to find harmony in the midst of trouble and chaos. And they would also look deep into the seeds of the present moment and see which seeds would flourish and which would wither away. So expectant mothers would come to these Brahmins with questions about their unborn children. And the Brahmins would tell them if the children were going to be lucky or unlucky, if they were going to be strong or beautiful or wise, and perhaps even what color their eyes would be. Well, Samba knew of this, and he and his friends had been out drinking all night, but still they had some energy in them for trouble. So Samba took a pillow and tied it to his belly, and put on a woman's dress, and said, "Oh, my friends, let's go visit these smarty Brahmins, huh? Let's go see what they have to say. They can see the unborn children, so it is said. I don't believe that for a moment. These silly mumbo-jumbo Brahmins, we're going to go to them and make fun of them. Let us see. Look at me, I'm so beautiful, aren't I? Call me Sambalina. Yes, call me Sambalina." And his friends laughed, ba, and they roared with laughter, and they all went through the streets, and they came to where the Brahmins were. And Samba said, "Oh, you lovely Brahmins, you're so wise. You must eat encyclopedias for breakfast, I think. I am here, I am Sambalina, destined soon to give birth to a baby, a child, yes. So I'm wondering, you with your magical poetic X-ray Veda vision, can you look at me? Can you see what my child will become in the future? Please tell me, you lovely Brahmins." And the chief Brahmin looked at all of them with blazing eyes and said, "Young man, you will soon give birth to an iron club, which will cause all of your families to massacre one another, and then this city will be devoured by the sea." And Samba and his friends said, "Bah-ha-ha-ha-ha," and they turned and they walked away. And Samba took off the woman's dress and threw it in an alley, and he untied the pillow and threw it down into the gutter. And he and his friends went home to drink. Well, soon after this, Samba's belly did in fact begin to grow larger. It seemed unbelievable, but day by day it happened. His belly got bigger. After 6-7 days, he was quite big in the belly. 8 days passed. On the 9th day, he began to suffer pains in his belly. He tried to sleep, but he could not. So in the darkness of that night, he called for the healers, and they came to his room, and in that darkness they delivered out of him an iron club. They took it out of him wet with blood and put it in a bowl. They sewed him up, worked over him so, though he lost a lot of blood, he did not die. And then one of the healers took the club in its iron bowl and a candle, and walked through the dark hallways of the palace to Krishna. And they found him there in his royal bedroom and awoke him and showed him the club still wet with blood in the bowl. And Krishna said, "The curse of Gandhari has come. Tomorrow, have this club brought to the beach, and have 3 blacksmiths smash it into dust, and then throw the dust into the waves of the sea." And then the healer went away, though Krishna remained awake, looking out the window of his bedroom at the sea. And the next day 3 blacksmiths did take that iron club to the shore, and they spent the day pounding on this iron club, reducing it to dust. But at the end of the day, there was one chunk of stubborn iron that could not be pounded down to dust. By this time there was only one blacksmith left, and he was tired. So, ready to return to his family, he took that last chunk of iron and threw it into the sea. Well, the next day, this piece of iron was swallowed by a fish. This fish grew larger, and one day a fisherman caught this fish and sold it in the market. It was bought by the wife of a merchant. She took it home to her house. She cooked that fish over a fire, so the aroma filled the house. And then when it was done, she cut the fish open, and there, in the fish's belly, was the chunk of iron. Strange, she thought. How curious, a chunk of iron in the belly of a fish. She set the iron aside, and her husband, the merchant, came home, and their 2 children were there, a boy and a girl, and they all ate the fish. And then the merchant noticed the chunk of iron on the counter. "What is that?" he said. "It's a piece of iron. I found it in a fish," she said. "Weird," he said. "Strange. I will take it to my shop tomorrow. Who knows? People like to buy strange things." So the next day, the merchant took that chunk of iron to his store and put it on a shelf. And one day a hunter came into the store, seeking to buy earrings for his wife, for that day was her birthday. And as he was looking around the store, his eyes fell upon that chunk of iron. So the merchant sold a pair of green earrings to the hunter, and also the chunk of iron. And that evening he brought his wife some flowers, and they ate together with their children. And she put on the green earrings and liked them very much. And later that night, the hunter's wife and his children all went to bed, but the hunter remained awake, sitting by the fire. And he took a file, and he worked on that chunk of iron, sharpening it into an arrowhead for his hunting. In the silence of the dark house, it was the only sound to be heard, the file against the iron, scritch, scritch, scritch. Meanwhile, from the palace of Hastinapura, Yudishtira the king was ruling wisely and well. And one day a ragged man came into the kingdom. One day a ragged man came into the palace. One day this ragged man came into the throne room, and it was Vyasa. "Vyasa," said Yudishtira. "Ah, Vyasa, you, the storyteller, you with the oceanic mind, you who are composing this poem in which we all live. Tell me, Vyasa, tell me, why have you written this poem?" "Ah, Yudishtira," said Vyasa, "I have written this poem to inscribe Dharma into the hearts of the men and women of this earth." "Very good," said Yudishtira. "And are you succeeding? Has this happened?" "Well, you tell me, Yudishtira, you who are living this life of this poem, tell me, how is it for you in this kingdom?" "All things are well," he said. "We've had 16 years of peace and harmony. The land seems to be flourishing, and the people also." Now Dhritarashtra, the blind king, and his queen Gandhari with a veil over her eyes, they were there as well in the throne room, and Kunti also. And Vyasa spoke to them. "Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Kunti, tell me, how has it been for you these last 16 years? 16 years, said Gandhari. "It's a long time, but it does not feel long. Honestly, Vyasa, it feels like the war happened only yesterday, and the wounds and the scars of that war are still heavy on my heart." "For me too," said Dhritarashtra, "it is the same. Though 16 years have passed, every day I see again my children covered in blood, their faces twisted with pain. Vyasa, truly there's only one thing I desire, and that is to see my children alive and well again, though I know in this life it will never happen." "Do not sorrow," said Vyasa. "All of you, do not grieve. Tonight, come to the sacred river Ganges. I shall meet you there, and I shall show you all of your sons, all the ones you loved, alive and well again." So word spread throughout the palace of what Vyasa had promised. And that evening, with great anticipation, everyone left the palace, and dressed in their finest clothes, they walked through the city and through the grasses down to the banks of the sacred Ganges. The sun had just gone down. Twilight was over the world. And Vyasa looked at all of them, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Kunti, Yudishtira, Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, Sahadeva, Draupadi, and many more. And he walked out into the river, and facing the river, he began to sing. Suddenly, someone came walking out of the river. They saw his head first, then his shoulders, then his hips. It was Karna, looking as beautiful and glorious as he had in life. And behind him came Bhishma and Drona, and behind them came Duryodhana and Dushasana, and Shakuni, and King Drupada, the father of Draupadi, and many more. They came through the river, walking towards the shore. Everyone rejoiced on the shore as everyone they loved stepped onto the bank of the Ganges. And Kunti embraced her son Karna. "Oh, Karna," she said, "I'm so sorry for rejecting you, so sorry for casting you into the waters." "Mother," he said, "it's all right, mother, it's all right." And Karna embraced Yudishtira. "Oh, my brother," said Yudishtira, "my brother, so good to see your face." And Arjuna and Karna embraced and spoke for a long time. So Karna embraced all of his brothers in turn, and then he embraced Draupadi, and they shared many sweet words. Yudhishthira and Gandhari were given sight for that night alone by Vyasa, and they rejoiced to see Duryodhana, Dushasana, and all their other children, and they embraced them, and tears of joy fell to the ground. And Draupadi embraced her father, King Drupada, killed in the war. And Bhishma and Drona were welcomed by the Pandavas, and they spoke for a long time. So many tears were shed. Gatotkaч came out of the water. "Ah, my son," said Bhima. "Ah, my son!" And he embraced his son. "Ah, father, it is good to see you again," said Gatotkaч. And here came King Warata, killed in the war, laughing. "Do you remember the carnival?" he said. "Do you remember the carnival?" "Yes," said Bhima. "Yes, I remember the carnival." So they all came, and Amba came, and she embraced them all. They spent a long time together on the side of that river, telling their stories. And then the light began to come into the sky, and it seemed that the sun would soon rise. So Vyasa began to sing, and everyone turned and walked back into the river. Goodbye, goodbye. Slowly they went under the water. Karna went under the water, and Duryodhana and Dushasana, and Bhishma and Drona, and still Vyasa sang. The last one went under the water, Getodkach, and the waters flowed over them all. And then the sun rose into the sky. And that day, Vyasa spoke to all of them in the throne room, and he said goodbye. "I am leaving now," he said, "returning to the forest, though of course I am always here." "Goodbye, Vyasa, goodbye," they all said. And he left the palace and left the city and went off into the forest. And several days later, in the throne room, Dhritarashtra said, "Yudishtira, it is time for Gandhari and I to go. We have entered the autumn of our lives. We will go to the forest, where all things begin and all things end. We will live out our days there, in peace and contentment, leaving this kingdom behind." "Ah, do not go," said Yudishtira. "Stay here with us in the palace. And also, I mean no offense, but blind as you are, how will you survive in the forest? How will you get by? What will you eat? How will you live?" And Kunti said, "I will help them. For I too, Yudishtira, wish to leave this kingdom, to enter the forest, to live in harmony with the silence and peace that is at the heart of all things, though here in the kingdom it is often hard to find." So they spoke, and Yudishtira could not dissuade them. And the next day, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, and Kunti embraced Yudishtira and all of his brothers, and Draupadi, and they said goodbye to the servants of the palace, and they went across the palace garden, past the reflecting pool, past the large banyan tree, and they walked out the gate of the palace and into the city. And some say that the whole city was there to watch them go, watching them walk down the long road towards the gate of the city. And others say that there was no one in that street to watch them go, because no one remembered them, and that the old man and the two old women walked quietly down that street to the gate of the city, and walked through that gate, and that it closed behind them without a sound. And it is said that the three of them lived in happiness for many years in the forest, close to the whispering wind, close to the songs of the birds, close to the earth and the sky. And that one day Dhritarashtra smelled smoke on the wind, and he said, "What is that? What is happening?" And Kunti stood up, and with her failing eyes she looked, and she said, "I see smoke far off. I see a glow between the trees. There is a forest fire, and it is coming nearer." And Gandhari said, "We must go, quick, as fast as we can. We must go away." And Dhritarashtra said, "No. Dear ones, we have lived on this earth long enough. The fire is itself a god. Let us surrender to that god, and let us enter the other world." So Dhritarashtra reached out into his darkness and found the hand of Gandhari, his queen. And Gandhari, in turn, reached out and took the hand of Kunti. And then, together, the three of them walked towards the flames. So Time the Destroyer moved forward, carrying all things on its back. And as Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, and Kunti gave themselves to the fire, far away in the kingdom of Dwarka, Krishna was in the throne room, looking out a high window at the sea. "Tomorrow shall be a day of remembrance," he said, "for it will be 36 years since the war ended. Let us all go to the mainland, go along the shore and go to the place of grasses, and make offering to the sea in honor of all those who died in the war." So he commanded, and so the servants of the palace worked all night preparing for the ceremony the next day. And early in the morning the chariots were standing ready, loaded down with fruit and offerings for the gods, and with food and drink besides. Everyone in the city was ready, the Brahmins, the warriors, the merchants, the farmers, and the workers. And Krishna saw that the warriors were wearing their swords. So he said, "Friends, let us not bring swords to this gathering. Let us remember the war with our hearts and not with our weapons." So the soldiers put their gleaming swords away. And everyone left the city and went across the bridge of blue and green stone to the shore. And they went along the shore to the place of grasses. These grasses had grown up quickly in recent years. No one was sure where they'd come from. They seemed like a secret that had suddenly been told. And when they arrived there, everyone made themselves comfortable as the Brahmins prepared for a ceremony of remembrance. And this ceremony did in fact happen. But the thing is, well, many of the soldiers had been drinking since the beginning of the day, so that many of the fruits which they brought to give as offerings to the gods ended up not a part of the ceremony, but instead thrown into the trees to be eaten by the monkeys. Still the Brahmins chanted their old songs and said their mantras. And when the ceremony was finished, everyone sat down to eat and to drink. And before long, talk turned to the war. And one man said, "Well, you know, Karna was truly the greatest warrior, for Arjuna only beat him through lies and tricks." "Ho, ho," said another, "not so fast. Karna was a good warrior, but he was deluded by wealth, Duryodhana's wealth in particular. Karna was a bad man." "No, it's the Pandavas who are evil," said another, "for Bhima cheated when he killed Duryodhana. He hit him below the belt." So the soldiers argued back and forth, and soon they began to push and shove each other. Soon a fistfight erupted. Soon a brawl was happening on the beach. Krishna waded into it. "Stop! Stop, you fools! Stop!" And one of them said, "Krishna, you are more evil than all the others put together. Because of your tricks, thousands of soldiers died." And Krishna said, "You fool, do you know who I am?" And he reached around for a weapon, but there were no weapons there. So he reached into the grasses, and as he did so, one of the long blades of grass became an iron spear. For the dust of the iron club was nestled in the heart of every blade of grass on that beach. So, with this iron spear in his hand, he brandished it, whacking 2 soldiers here and another there, beating them down to the ground. And 3 others came rushing at him, and others reached into the grasses, and for them too the blades of grass became iron spears. Soon blood was spilled. Soon men were dying on the beach. Their wives, their children cried out, "Stop! Stop!" But they could not stop them, and anger was a fire devouring every soldier there. And soon it seemed like there was nothing left on the beach but dead soldiers, weeping women, crying children, and Krishna. Krishna with the iron spear still in his hands. Trembling, he took a few steps towards the sea, looking out at all that water as though it could quench the anger in his heart. And then he dropped the spear to the ground and took a few steps out into the waves. And he looked far out at the sea for a long time. And that very day they burned all of the soldiers who'd been killed on the beach. And the flames went up into the sky, and they sang the old songs of sorrow and of grief. And smoke covered the sun, so that soon it was the color of dried blood. And at the end of the day, as the fires began to die down, ragged crowds of survivors made their way along the beach back towards the city of Dwarka. And Krishna, too, turned from the ashes of the soldiers and walked towards his white horse. But as he approached his horse, it reared its head up in alarm, as though Krishna was some kind of monster, and then bucking and tearing, it set loose from the reins and went galloping away across the beach. And it galloped out onto the waves, on top of the waves, and galloped across the surface of the sea, far and far away, until it could no longer be seen. Krishna watched his horse go. And then with empty, staring eyes, he walked along the beach towards the stone bridge and the kingdom of Dwarka, which he had ruled for so long. And that night, the survivors of the massacre on the beach slept in the city, but they did not sleep well. Many of them had strange dreams about a woman with coal-black eyes and skin as white as snow, who ran through the city, entering everyone's houses and blowing out the hearth fires burning there. And others dreamed that their houses were underwater, that fish swam in and out of the windows, that their doors swung open lazily into the blue water to admit flashing eels that came writhing into their homes. And in the morning, when the blue light of dawn was just beginning to spread through the sky, Krishna awoke, walked out of his palace, across the stone bridge and the beach, and into the forest. And he walked for a long time in that forest, enjoying the sounds of the birds, enjoying the sound of the wind in the trees. It was a beautiful place, and the roots sang their way up into the branches of the trees, and the leaves of those trees were like laughter in the sun. And at length, Krishna grew tired, and he lay down under a banyan tree, and he slept. And there was a hunter that day walking through the forest. He had his bow, he had his arrows. He had a special arrow, with an arrowhead carved from a chunk of iron. He walked through the forest, listening to the language of the wind, listening to the whispers of the leaves on the ground, walking carefully, silently, hardly making a sound. And then, through the ferns and the bushes, far off he saw something. A brown-skinned something. It looked like a deer sleeping. And he took that iron-headed arrow, and he fitted it to his bow, and taking aim, he let the arrow go. Shunk it went, and it hit Krishna right in the foot, and the hunter came running through the forest. And Krishna sat up, and the hunter saw that he had shot not a deer, but a man. "What have I done? What have I done?" And not just any man, but Krishna himself, the king of the kingdom of Dwarka. "Oh, your majesty, what have I done?" "You are a hunter, and you have been hunting. That is all," said Krishna. "But we must get you back to the city. We must find the healers." "No," said Krishna. "This iron is very toxic to all life. Already the poison is seeping up my leg towards my heart. My hunter, I do not have much time left." "Oh, Krishna, you can't die. You cannot die. You are the ruler of our kingdom. You are so wise. You cannot leave this earth." "All things arrive, and all things depart," said Krishna. "Flowers blossom and then fade. And so my time here is over." But you know so much," said the hunter. "I have so much I want to ask you. You have so much to teach." "What do you want to know?" said Krishna. I don't know. What did you say to Arjuna on the battlefield right before the war began? What did you tell him there between the two armies?" "Oh, hunter, I said many things. Perhaps Arjuna still remembers what I said, or perhaps he has forgotten it all. In any case, I can never say anything twice. Goodbye." And Krishna closed his eyes, and his breath left him for the last time, and his heart stopped, and he died. And the hunter, all in shock, cried tears which fell down to the forest floor. And then he picked up Krishna's body and began to walk through the forest. And as he did so, a wind began to blow, and soon he saw that the sky had become covered in gray clouds. And when he stepped out of the forest onto the beach, he saw a black storm cloud far off, approaching across the sea. And he saw that the sea itself was wild, churning, angry as though it would devour the earth. And thunder cracked once out of that sky. And then, as the rain began to fall, the hunter, with Krishna's dead body in his arms, walked across the beach and towards the stone bridge and the city of Dwarka. And news of Krishna's death traveled quickly through the world, so that soon a messenger came to the palace in the city of Hastinapura, and told Yudishtira and his brothers that all the men of the city of Dwarka had massacred each other on the beach, that Krishna himself had died in the forest, cut down by a common hunter, and that it was said that soon the city itself would be devoured by the sea. So they all listened in stunned silence, and then Arjuna said, "I will go." "What?" said Yudishtira. "I will go," he said. "Someone must help them, must lead the survivors to safety before their city is devoured by the sea. I will bring them here, to Hastinapura, where it is safe." And he called for his white horse, and for his bow and his arrows, and servants brought them to him. And he got on the back of his horse, and he called for his bow, and he called for his white horse, and his bow and his arrows, and he got on the back of his horse, and he galloped out of the city and into the farmlands. he went as fast as he could go, and he galloped through the great forest. And as he did so, the sky became covered in gray clouds, and a cold wind began to blow, shuddering the leaves of the trees down to the earth. And soon spatterings of rain came gusting out of that wind. And then he came to the grasslands, the grasses whispering, roaring with that wind. And then he came to the shore, and he galloped across the bridge, joining that kingdom to the sea, and he entered the city of Dwarka. And that city seemed empty, its streets deserted. Only here and there Arjuna found a woman tending a fire, or a few children playing in an alley. And in the palace it was the same. Just a few old men, just a few old women, a few ministers in the corners of the rooms. But there was an old serving woman there, and she welcomed him and led him down the hallways to the royal bedroom of Krishna. "We are glad you are here," she said, "for you are Krishna's dear friend. May you be welcome in our house." And Arjuna thanked her and went into the bedroom and closed the door behind him. The room was painted blue and decorated with paintings of peacocks on the walls, their feathers embracing all the colors of the rainbow. Through the window, Arjuna could see the sea crashing violently against the sides of the island of Dwarka. He put his bow and his arrows in the corner of the room, and then he sat down on the bed. He looked at the walls, the floor, the ceiling. He listened to the sound of the sea. And then Arjuna broke down and wept, and he cried for a long time. And the next day, as a cold wind blew, all of the survivors of the massacre on the beach gathered in the streets of the city, women and children, old men, old women, the women wearing all of their jewelry, everyone loaded down with all the possessions they wished to save. There was a man with an iron pot, another with a bag full of wooden flutes, the children carrying their toys. And then Arjuna got on his white horse and led them all out of the city. And they went across the bridge of blue and green stone. And as they did so, the waves began to tear apart the foundations of the city. And they went along the beach. And as they did so, rain began to fall on the towers of the palace. And then they went into the forest, a small boy looking back to take one last look. And as they entered that forest, the waves broke over the walls of the city and flowed wildly down the streets. And they journeyed all day through that forest until they came to a land of many hills. And then they came to a canyon of gray and blue stone. And as they went down this canyon, Arjuna heard a sound. And he looked up, and on the edges of the canyon, on both sides, he saw men on horseback, dressed in black cloth, holding spears and swords. And Arjuna gave a great cry of alarm, but already these thieves were descending upon the women and children. And Arjuna reached for his bow and tried to string that bow, but he found that he could not do it. And he tried to summon an astra of fire or of water, but the words would not come. And by this time it was too late. Already women and children and horses were being dragged and led away. A chariot was on fire. In desperation, Arjuna took his bow and used it like a club, pummeling a few men near him, but it did little good. The women were crying, help us, Arjuna!" But he could do nothing. And after a while, the only one left in that canyon was Arjuna. There were a few dead women, a few dead children around him, a chariot still burning, a few spooked horses running away. And Arjuna looked up at the sky, and he understood that his powers had left him at last. And he wept, and his tears fell down onto the cold and stony ground. And the next day, Arjuna returned to the palace of Hastinapura. And he told Yudishtira, his brothers, and Draupadi of the destruction of the city of Dwarka, and of his failure to protect the refugees from that city. They all listened in silence. And then Yudishtira said, "Our time on this earth is over. Tomorrow let us crown Pariksit king of the realm. And on the day following, let us set out from this kingdom for the forest. And from that forest let us journey into the mountains. And from those mountains let us enter the Otherworld." No one spoke. Draupadi began to weep silently. And then darkness covered the earth, and they all slept beneath the fierce and beautiful stars. And the next day, Pariksit, the grandson of Arjuna, was crowned king of the realm in a beautiful ceremony beside the sacred river Ganges. And that evening there was a feast in the palace, and delicious food was brought out onto the tables, and the bards sang the old songs, and Bhima told amazing jokes, and Nakula and Sahadeva juggled, and Arjuna and Draupadi danced in the center of the room. And soon Yudishtira came to join them, and then Bhima, and then Nakula, and then Sahadeva, so that soon all of the Pandavas and Draupadi were dancing together in a wild circle in the center of the feasting hall. And the people laughed and threw flowers up into the air, which fell onto their heads and then down onto the floor. And when that feast was over, when darkness covered the world, Yudishtira, Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, Sahadeva, and Draupadi each took a candle from the feasting hall and walked down to the side of the sacred river Ganges. And they took dried leaves from the ground, and placing the candles onto the leaves, they set the candles adrift in the river. And they watched as the candles drifted away, and they watched as the candles drifted away. And the next day, they awoke to find all of the servants gathered in the throne room of the palace. And Yudishtira, his brothers, and Draupadi embraced them all and said goodbye. And then they all walked out of the throne room for the last time. And they walked across the palace garden, past the reflecting pool where they had played as children, past the great banyan tree, where once Bhishma had warned them about a house made of fire. And they walked out of the palace and through the streets of the city. And everyone in that city lined the streets watching them go. And then they walked through the farmlands, the sun rising in the sky. They walked for a long time, and soon there were no more cities. Soon There were no more towns. Soon there was hardly a house. Draupadi looked back and saw the last house far behind them. And then they came to a statue of Ganesha. And they all took flowers and placed them at the feet of this statue. And then they crossed a great bridge of roots over a canyon. And they walked through that forest where once a Rakshasa and Bhima had battled. And they walked past the place where they had told Ghatotkach their stories. And they walked past the Jambul tree that Draupadi had once plucked a fruit from. And they remembered all of these things in their hearts. And then they approached the mountains. And by this time, a stray dog had come. They weren't sure from where. They weren't sure from what village. But this dog was faithful and followed them every step of the way. And then they came to the hills, and the hills got higher, and the trees fewer. And then they walked up into the mountains. Higher and higher they went. Soon there was snow falling. Soon there was ice. Still, the dog came with them. The going was hard. The paths got narrower and narrower. Higher and higher they went as the wind blew around them. Draupadi was the first to fall. Climbing with the others, in a moment, as she set her foot on the path, her yoga failed her, and she fell down into the abyss. They mourned in their hearts, but they kept walking. And then Nakula fell. He took a bad step. He tumbled down the side of a canyon and was gone. Higher they went, and then they lost Sahadeva. He too fell down the side of the mountain. Even Bhima lost his grip. Even Bhima, the strong man. A rock came loose in his hands and he went tumbling down into nothing. Finally, even Arjuna lost his grip and tumbled down the side of the mountain. And finally, there was only Yudishtira and the dog. Higher and higher they went. And at last, they reached the top. Clouds were around them. The wind blew. Yudishtira stood there with the dog, victorious at the top of the mountain. And suddenly, in the blowing snow, right before him, there appeared a doorway of fire. And a voice said, "Welcome, Yudishtira. This is the doorway to the Otherworld. Step through it and enter paradise." And Yudishtira looked at the dog which had followed them all this way, and he saw that the dog was afraid of this doorway of fire. So he picked the dog up in his arms and held the dog close to his chest, and he stepped towards the doorway. And a voice said, "No! Stop! Yudishtira! Paradise is not open to dogs." "What?" said Yudishtira. Paradise is not open to dogs. You may enter, but dogs may not." "This dog has followed me faithfully for many miles," said Yudishtira. "He has been a true friend, so I should be faithful to him. I will not abandon this dog." "You cannot enter paradise unless you leave that dog behind," said the voice. "Yudishtira, leave the dog and enter paradise." "No," said Yudishtira, "that would be wrong. This dog has been a friend to me. I will be faithful to this dog. If dogs cannot enter paradise, then I will not go." And as he said these words, the dog vanished from his arms, and the voice said, "Yudishtira, I am pleased with you, for I am Dharma, your father. You have done well. Come, enter the doorway, and be welcome in paradise." So Yudishtira stepped through the doorway of fire, and entered a realm of light and white clouds. And there, in that realm, he saw a golden throne, and on this throne there was Duryodhana, drinking from a golden cup. He smiled and raised his glass to Yudishtira, and beside Duryodhana was Dushasana, who had dragged Draupadi by the hair. And beside him was Shakuni, who had stolen the kingdom from Yudishtira in a dice game. And they were all Duryodhana's brothers, laughing and carousing. And Yudishtira said, "This is paradise?" "Yes," said Dharma, "this is paradise. Look how beautiful it is." "It is beautiful," said Yudishtira. "But why is Duryodhana here, and Dushasana, and Shakuni? These are evil men. They stole everything from us. They dragged Draupadi by the hair." "This is paradise," said Dharma. "Be welcome here." "But I want to go where my brothers are, where my dear lady Draupadi is," said Yudishtira. "Can you show me where they are?" "They are not here," said the voice. "But if you wish, I can take you to them." "Yes, please," said Yudishtira, "please. I want to go where they are." So the voice of Dharma led Yudishtira away from the realm of white clouds, and to a rocky place. And there was a passageway going down into the rock. It was dark. There were a few sputtering torches there. Down and down they went, and around them the earth itself seemed to grumble and growl. Deeper and deeper they went by flickering light, until they came to a great cave of darkness. And the smell there was horrible. Smells of rotting meat, of guts bleached by the sun. Horrible stench. And Yudishtira said, "What is that smell? Where are we going?" "We are going to meet your brothers and your Princess Draupadi," said Dharma. "That is where we are going." So, following the voice of Dharma, Yudishtira went deeper and deeper into the darkness, until they came to the bottom of the cave. "Where are they?" said Yudishtira. "Where are they?" And in the darkness, far off, he heard a voice. "I am here," said Arjuna. "I am here. Is that you, Yudishtira?" "I am here," said Yudishtira. "Where's everyone else?" And Bhima said, "I am here." And Nakula and Sahadeva said, "We are here. It is good to see you, brother." And Draupadi said, "I am here, Yudishtira. I am here." He could see none of them. He could only hear their voices in the darkness. "What trick is this?" said Yudishtira. "Why are Duryodhana and Dushasana and Shakuni there in the sweet realm of heaven, and my brothers are here in this awful, horrible place?" "This is simply where they are," said Dharma. "If you wish to remain with them, then this is where you must remain." Yudishtira smelled the horrible stench of that dark hole in the earth. He looked out into the darkness, and he said, "If this is where my brothers and Draupadi are, then this is where I will stay. For I care deeply for my brothers, and Draupadi, she is the woman of my heart, and I love her." And the voice of Dharma said, "Yudishtira, I am pleased with you. What you have seen is neither heaven nor hell, for the other world is a realm beyond all opposites. Come, follow my voice, and we will truly enter that realm. So following the voice of Dharma, Yudishtira walked through the darkness towards a flickering light. It grew brighter. It was green. And they stepped out of that tunnel in the rock and into a forest. Birds were singing in the trees, and it seemed he had never heard birds sing more sweetly. And then he walked through the forest, following the voice of Dharma towards a great whispering, rushing sound. And they came to the shore of the great sacred river Ganges. "Here is the sacred river," said Dharma, "the river that flows through the three worlds. Enter this river, Yudishtira, and let go of all your sufferings, and let go of all of your sorrow." So Yudishtira stepped into the water, and then waded out into the sacred river Ganges, and then ducked his head under and swam out into the blue dream of that river. And as he swam, crossing that river, all his sufferings and his sorrows were washed from his body. And soon he found he could feel again the bed of the river beneath his feet. And placing one foot in front of the other, still in the water, he moved forward. And then Yudishtira stepped out onto the other shore. I invite you to put some breath into your hands and offer it up to this story which has come a long way to be with us, this story which nourishes us with its insight, its images, and its wisdom communicated through images. And so it is good practice to give the story something in return. I invite you to do that. What amazing follow-through this part of the story has. We go to the end. We don't just end with all our heroes happy in the palace and they lived happily ever after. We go to the very end. I love that. And I'm reminded once again of something I heard from the Dalai Lama, which I've quoted before on this podcast. It was a talk here in my town of Ithaca to a couple thousand people. And he said, at one point, he said, all things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Here in the West, you have trouble with that last part. And then he laughed. And I think it's true. And this part of the story is all about that last part. Things breaking down, failure, despair. We begin with the city of Dwarka, the city which Krishna rules over. Krishna, who is God come down to earth as a human king. But even there, things don't go well. Gandhari has cursed Krishna, if you remember from the previous part of this story, that all his family would murder each other, just as the Gandhari saw her children murder each other. And your city will be devoured by the sea. And so it comes about. And we get this wild, clownish sort of story with the boys imitating a pregnant woman, which they're mocking birth. It seems to me they're mocking birth. This sort of not just sacred but completely natural, wonderful miracle that happens all the time, and they are mocking it as well as mocking the Brahmins, which can't be a good idea at all. And so they're cursed, and they bring about this iron club, which then gets turned into dust and becomes grasses, and everybody kills each other on the beach, which is totally horrible. And I'm struck also by how Krishna participates in this. He knows this is a curse. He knows that nothing can be done, perhaps, but nevertheless, he sort of is invested in it, like he's on the beach killing people, which is a remarkable thing. And as a storyteller, as a listener to this story, even as I speak it, I have to watch myself and be aware of my hankerings for Krishna, this divine being, to be apart when he's divine, and that comes from a belief, I think, that's deep in me, in us perhaps, in the modern world, that the divine is far away and peace is far away. There's trouble here on earth. There's peace out there with the gods and the angels and stuff. But it's not that way in the view of this story. Krishna has come down to earth, just as Christ came down to earth, right? And just as Christ, he's embroiled in the struggles of the here and now. And that's a remarkable thing. So much so that he actually gets angry and starts killing people on the beach. We saw him lose it in the war, the beginning of the war, but this is of a different sort, it seems. This is a different kind of anger. It seems lower to me, and it's more troublesome and hard to accept as a listener, I would say. I don't know how you feel, but this guy, this being, this king who is God, is also capable of petty anger and just not seeing the harmony that could be there, and instead just pummeling people left and right. Remarkable. So because I find that troublesome, I think it has something to tell me, that part of the story. That's usually a clue. If there's something you don't like, it's easy to cancel the story and just be like, forget it. I'm not paying attention. It's wrong. It's translated badly, blah, blah, blah. And those are all possibilities, but most of the time it's because there's something we don't want to accept. So that God should come to earth and not be this radiant being of light and peace, but should be embroiled in disaster and failure is hard for me to accept. And I like that this story nudges me, pokes me towards that acceptance. Also, that beautiful scene, the vision of the sons, all the dead come out of the river, Vyasa. The teller of this story shows everybody, all of them coming out of the water. Miraculous, amazing, and a sweet scene. And I would just point out the centrality of the river Ganges in this story, which we saw at the beginning. The goddess Gunga married Santanu and gave birth to Bhishma. And this river's just been throughout this story, and it's quite remarkable. And then we get Arjuna losing his powers also not a Hollywood moment, right? Failure, he goes there, he weeps. Like Odysseus in the Odyssey, who weeps quite often, Arjuna has come into a part of his life which is sorrow and failure. It's great. It's so sad and beautiful that it's actually in this story. It's not just triumph all the time. I don't know what media you consume, but it's not fashionable to talk about failure in the big culture, in the pop culture, whatever, Star Trek, the Marvel movies, Star Trek Picard, I'm thinking of in particular. It's not cool just to end and go quietly. We want to go forever and keep going. Now, capitalism likes that because it means more movies. We can sell stuff. We will never end. This franchise will never end. And we will use CGI, we'll use artificial intelligence, whatever we got to do to make these actors look younger, which they sometimes do, of course, or whatever, to keep the story going. We can't come to an end. But here in the Mahabharata, we have an end. And it's rough, but it's so satisfying at the same time. It's over. Arjuna loses his powers. He fails. He tries to use his astras, which dazzled the world in the war, and were causing fire to come out of the sky and iron and chunks of ice. And he can't do it. And he can't even string his bow. That task which he accomplished way back when at the ceremony there, the competition, which Draupadi set up so she could find a husband. If you remember, he strung the bow there quite well. And now he can't even string his own bow. And the result is failure. The result is death of women and of children. They all get carried off or killed. And he is helpless to do anything to stop this. Ouch. I just want to sit in that moment for a while because it's beautiful. It's like dark earth, which nourishes, as opposed to the bright flowers. As opposed to the eagle high in the sky. We're in darkness and we're in trouble. And it is rough, but it is nourishing as well. And this story challenges me, and perhaps us as well, in its ending, when heaven and hell, as we put it, are sort of set up and then wiped away, erased. We get this vision of heaven and all the bad guys are there. All the evil people are there. What's going on? And then we go to hell, quote unquote, and there's all the heroes and all Yudishtira's friends. And this is all an example. This is all a test or a teaching to show him that the world he's going to is beyond our human opposites. Beyond our human opposites. So that's another moment where I find this story it's not comfortable, and I like it. It challenges me in that way. And of course the dog is fantastic. He wants to bring the dog into paradise. Fantastic. So here we are, having told this entire story, 16 episodes of a podcast. My hope is that this story lives in you, and that you can remember it. My best hope would be that there's something in this which makes you turn to someone else in your life and say, hey, I heard this crazy thing the other day where Krishna just freaked out in the middle of a war or whatever. Draupadi wished for 5 husbands and she got it. I hope there's some little story in this which inspires you to share it with others so that the story may live. This story is alive and well. It's not on life support like some stories. It's alive and well in India and throughout Asia. But I'm not telling it as a lesson in the culture of India. I'm not fit to do that. I am not from India. I'm not Hindu. I have tried to do my work, and I hope to continue to do that work, to study this culture, and perhaps to go there someday. But I feel like this story has something to tell us as humans. And you don't have to worship Shiva to get it, just as you don't have to worship Athena, Zeus, and Poseidon to get nourishment from the Odyssey. So my hope is that it nourishes you as it has me. I found this story in my 20s. I guess I've told that story elsewhere on this podcast, but I picked up a book in a garage sale. I carried it around for years. I didn't read it. Ended up reading it at a temp job in New York City, a Dutch investment firm I was working at, up in the skyscraper, reading about Yudishtira and Arjuna and Draupadi as the phones ring, and I answer them and put them down, and then I go back to this story. At the time, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, one of my thoughts was, this is better than Star Wars. That's where I was at in my 20s, but let's not be embarrassed. Star Wars is an epic, and it's one I grew up with. That's what I loved about it. Its size. It gave me a world I wanted to be in, and it seemed to include my own world. And I feel that the Mahabharata does that. And as I've said, it challenges me, perhaps you as well. And it has it's rooted in a living tradition, in a spirituality, which is very real and beautiful and accessible to us as humans on this earth. And it's also, it's not comfortable, as I keep saying. It asks us to react. What is good? What is evil? What is right action in the world? I have composed this poem to inscribe Dharma into the hearts of the men and women of the earth. That's what Vyasa says. And also it is said, whoever hears this will have long life and good health. May it be so. May it be so. But the question is, I think, what action will we take when we're done listening to this, when my voice has gone away, and the story is an echo in the corners of your room, in any room of your car, wherever you're listening to this one. The story is a memory that we almost don't know it is there, but it is there. It's part of us, in our bones, perhaps. And how will it influence us? How will we learn from it? What action will we take next? Thank you for listening to this. I invite you to start all over. That's kind of what I want to do, and listen to this a second time. Experience this story a second time. I invite you to tell it to others. Please share this story with others, for it has much to offer us. If you're able to support this podcast, please do so. You can do that through patreon.com /storyjl. Sorry, patreon.com /storyjl. That's what it is, yeah. That's a great way to support this work of getting stories out into the world, and it's very helpful to me. You can also find more stories on my website, jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. What else is there to say? It's taken me about a year to do this podcast of the Mahabharata. Not like I spent every minute on it, but it's been a lot of work, and it's been very rewarding. Thank you for listening, because without listeners, the story goes nowhere. And it could just stay in a book, and the books are great, but they're just on the shelf. And now it lives in the voice, and perhaps in our hearts as well. Thank you, and take care.